Anin Bojo, and welcome to Ancestral Voices We Belong. I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Rebeka Tabobondung. She is a media and story creator, and she's Anishinaabe and Beaver Clan from Wasauksing First Nation, which is located along the shores of Georgian Bay in Ontario, Canada. She's also served as elected chief counselor in her community. Rebeka is the proud founder and editor-in-chief of MUSKRAT a leading digital Indigenous arts and culture magazine. She's also a filmmaker, writer, poet, and Indigenous knowledge researcher with a strong body of work focused on Indigenous birth knowledges. Rebeka's latest innovation is the interactive Spirit of Birth series on Aboriginal People's Television Network, or APTN, that follows Indigenous midwives, knowledge keepers, and birth workers as they restore birth practices in their communities. She co-founded the Chi-Dewan Indigenous Storytellers Festival in Wasauksing First Nation, which is located on the beautiful shores of Georgian Bay. And in 2021, Rebeka co-edited the anthology Indigenous Toronto, which won the Speaker's Book Award and Toronto Book Award. Welcome, Rebeka. It's wonderful to have you on Ancestral Voices We Belong. We have a wonderful history together in a variety of capacities, but it's amazing to review all the work you have embraced.
Ani Bojo, Kim, it's so wonderful to connect with you, and thank you so much for this invitation. And yes, we have connected on so many different levels, including Spirit of Birth.
Oh, right.
And
don't let those secrets out.
Honor. The secrets out. It was such an honor to interview you and have you share your knowledge as a grandmother and, you know, our sacred knowledge as women, as life givers and grandmothers, and just how important it is to honor that connection that we have as women.
Yeah. I'm really pro matriarchal insertion. You know, I think we have to have a matriarchal revolution that restores our rightful place, especially as Indigenous women in the Indigenous cosmology, but just in the Canadian diaspora. We're really the great unknown as Indigenous people, but as an Indigenous matriarch, we're even more unknown. So the work you're doing is incredibly powerfully influential on restoring perhaps some of that harmony and balance. But my first question for you is, what drives you to keep so busy? Because I believe you're also a mom and time can only stretch so far. So what keeps you so busy? What's driving you?
Wow, what drives me and keeps me so busy? Well, yeah, I would say, you know, for the past 20 years, it has been being a mom. And, you know, when you're putting energy into caring and bringing up a person in this world, there's very, very much to do.
Yes.
But I'm actually, you know, at this stage right now where I just turned 50. And my son is now 20 and he's gone. He's kind of left the nest, or he's halfway out, so to speak. And he's pursuing his own dreams, which are music. And so here I am. And I'm right now, for example, I'm at home and I'm by myself and I feel, you know, I'm entering this new stage of life where where I'm not so busy, where I have this extra time, and I feel like I'm in this kind of moment of reflection, you know, of like, okay, what's next? You know, like, no.
Well, don't fill it up too much, because your son's got one foot in the door still. And, you know, he may pop back and forth, but congratulations on reaching a half century. You know, in our world, our statistics for lifespan is much shorter than the average Canadian. And so we don't take that, you know, that milestone lightly. I think it's a really important one. And in your very short 50 years, you have accomplished so much. And I can't believe you're looking for even more now. to tap into with your magic. But looking at the diverse work that you've undertaken, what resonates as the most important or proudest moment for you, and why?
Mm-hmm. Wow. And the work I've undertaken, like you mentioned in the bio, a big part of my work has been inspired by our own traditional Indigenous knowledge. And I feel like when I'm reflecting on that journey for me, it really was this being a life giver and having my son, Ziguan, and having such a positive experience, birth experience, with Indigenous midwives who provided my care, and kind of making that choice to believe in my own body, to believe in my own spirit, to follow my curiosity. Because 20 years ago, I was here in Wasauksing First Nation, and I was hanging out with my father. He's now passed on. But we were spending time here on the land. We were building a cabin, and I was pregnant at that time. And I remember him telling me that my great-grandmother, so his grandmother who raised him, Lucy, she was a midwife. And that just really sparked so much for me. I really wanted to learn more because in that time, there was so very little out there within Indigenous media or any media that was published about birth knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I was just like, my spirit wanted this, was craving to learn more about that life stage, about what is that spiritual journey. Like, I know I'm on this journey, but I would like more insight. And so what I decided to do was connect with knowledge keepers, and I connected with the late Marie Anderson who spent time living in Shawniga.
My community.
Yes, and her father was Francis Peggy-Magabo.
Oh, famous.
And they are, you know, she shared so many insights, and it was so rich. And then I connected to Indigenous midwives in Toronto, and I decided to have my son at home in Toronto with the aid of midwives.
Wow.
And so for me, I'm just reflecting on that. That was such a positive experience. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, I've ever put my body through. You know, there's the pain. Like, it literally sends me, you know, to the spirit world. I thought I was dying, you know?
Yes.
And exactly. And it was like my body was opening, you know, to creation itself, you know? And I wasn't alone. It was my son too, making that perilous journey, you know, from the spirit world to our earth side. It was this moment of, complete, to me, empowerment. And so after kind of surviving that and just like trusting, you know, like my body is doing this, you know, and pulling the strength from all of the ancestors and grandmothers and mothers that had come before me, I realized I can do anything.
Yes, you can.
I can do anything. And so I think like that moment was probably one of the most powerful moments of my life.
Oh, gosh.
And and it's just what a gift, you know, that we are given. And not to say that everyone needs to have children or do it that way.
True.
But when you
do
on it, yes.
And there's magic. It's magic. It feels like magic, you know, to experience birth, to actually give birth, and to go through it in more of a traditional way rather than, you know, with all the gadgets and the lights and the noise and the kind of disconnected way that hospitals treat birth. It is a totally different experience. And I can really relate to what you're saying because I too, with my youngest daughter, had arranged a home birth, again with the Indigenous midwives in Toronto, 7th generation midwives, I believe is what they're called.
Yeah.
And it was the care in preparation for the birth was extraordinary, but the post-care was so instrumental in my sense of well-being, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And I'm sure that was yours as well. And how lucky are we? How lucky are we at this particular point in time in Canada that we're still able to access this kind of support and work? I do feel like it's magic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And we are very lucky. Like so that sparked, such an interest for me. I talked with the midwives from 7th generation and asked them as well, could you please share your knowledge, And what they had said at that time was, we're on this journey as well. We are ourselves learning this knowledge and reclaiming this knowledge because, of course, as you mentioned, like there had been such a silencing of Indigenous birth knowledge. Like 100%. Midwives, they were banned from our communities.
Well, they went underground. Yeah. I mean, they were still available, but you had to know somebody who knew somebody. I had the privilege of having the first certified Indigenous midwife. Carol Cucci was, and she was still in training when I had my youngest daughter. She's since retired, but I believe her daughter is following in her footsteps. Am I correct?
Yes, she is. Her daughter is Rachel, and they established the Kitaganing midwives practice based in Nipissing First Nation, which is where they're from. And so Carol too has been such an inspiration to me and to many others, as you mentioned. Yes, so that's what I realize is like, not everybody has access to Indigenous midwives or even midwives for that matter. Yeah. So we are indeed very lucky because in fact, the majority of women do not have access at all.
Right. And the resurgence of this is primary, especially in the northern communities where giving birth means leaving your community for extended time periods, not having the emotional support of family because it's very costly to be shipped out just to give birth. And then you're there for quite a period of time before you can even return to your communities. This is a big failure in the Canadian medical system when it comes to Indigenous birthing practices, in my view.
Oh, yes, exactly. And you see that in a lot of the northern communities today, yes, and they call it often birth evacuations.
I know. It's an unfortunate term.
I know. And it has such, repercussions.
It does.
Because one of the main teachings, beautiful teachings that I learned, and especially through Marie Anderson, and I've realized now since talking to many Indigenous knowledge keepers that this is, a shared belief amongst many Indigenous nations, is like one of the main teachings of a pregnant mom was for that pregnant mom, and including the partner, the father was also considered in the Anishinaabe, according to Marie, pregnant as well. Mm-hmm. And the reason why the father was considered pregnant was because that little spirit also travels with the father.
Yes.
So the father has a responsibility, for his actions. And at that time, he was advised not to take life. Out of respect for life, he shouldn't take life. So therefore, he abstained, from hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
And, taking life. But what that meant for the family was that the community stepped up for the family.
Right. The interdependence and the relationality needed to be reinforced.
Exactly.
So they could be taken care of.
They wanted to ensure that mother and that father didn't have to stress about anything.
Right.
And
so beautiful.
Yes. And that's so fundamental because there is the belief that, what you feel, what the mother feels, the baby feels.
Exactly. Imprints the baby at a genetic cellular level. Because we know that in this country, we have a horrible, horrible history of cultural genocide being, dumped and heaped upon us for over 150 years. And this came to light through, of course, the unveiling of the residential school system and the enormous harms to well over 150,000 documented Indigenous children forced into these schools. And this brings me to my next question, Rebeka, because living on a reserve in a country that committed this cultural genocide against a targeted segment of society, the sovereign nations, the Indigenous nations from coast to coast to coast, this was legally binding and permissible. When you reflect on that, how do you see the work that you do ride this kind of wave of reconciliation? Because this is the new catch term that everybody's using, reconciliation. And I know you explore that to a greater or lesser degree, maybe using that word, maybe not. But how do you see the work you're doing actually connect to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and in many ways, I feel like that's why, one of the reasons I'm inspired to document our traditional knowledge is because, these elders, like they are, it's been said, our libraries, their knowledge is so precious.
Yeah.
And their knowledge informs not only, myself as a person, but can inform all of society.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like when reflecting on the sheer brutality of colonization, it in Canada was an attack on women and children, a direct attack.
Yes.
In particular, it was a separation of mother and child at birth. And even, with Marie, that was one of the stories she told me, was she was sitting under a shaded tree with her mother. And she had said to her, when your child is going to be born, it's going to be a white man to hold the baby, and it's not going to be good. Oh. And so, right then, and then shortly after, right then was a time where, midwifery was banned and women were forced to go to the hospitals, mm-hmm. where so often their babies were taken away.
Yeah. We just heard, or we got reminded because we've already known about this, but the birth alerts, especially prominent in the province of Manitoba, where if you give your identity or you are seen to be an Indigenous woman giving birth, they call the Children's Aid while you're in labor and tell them that a baby's coming so they can prepare to come and figure out how they can remove the child still from the families for the most basic of ridiculous decision-making. Maybe the income's too low or the car seat's not up to date enough, or, your home is a small home and they deem that unacceptable. I mean, the interference and the removal of children is still a common practice today. And many hospitals deny this practice, but probably, the stories come out in the Spirit of Birth series that you're doing. I'm sure people have mentioned that, they've had this struggle. Here they have this beautiful experience, and then the outcome in a hospital setting is perhaps a challenge to even hanging on to the child that you just gave birth to. Very tragic.
Yes, exactly. The impact of the child welfare system today is still so strong, and we do not live, in a post-colonial reality. We are still very much, in a state of active colonization in the settlers, society. And that was one thing that the midwives, that many of them that I spoke to, is really ensuring that they provided a safe place for women to give birth. And that would be let's say child welfare is involved with their families, still being able to provide a safe place and not, withholding information from them or anything like surprises that might happen. Mm-hmm. And even, trying their best to get housing or,
supports,
different things. Because
yeah.
often these things are, a result of poverty. They're a result of colonization that puts women into such vulnerable situations.
Right. We know the socioeconomic statistics for Indigenous women in particular from this country are at the lowest of the low. And they don't seem to be increasing, even with the public awareness that this is a reality and we need to do better. There seems to be a gap in those support services, but I do admire the efforts of seventh generation midwives and the other organizations across the province who are having a resurgence of Indigenous midwives insert their support, but also their wisdom and knowledge in connecting us to the support services that are Indigenous specific and respectful. I think that gap has yet to be kind of rooted in as the norm to show us respect, at that most vulnerable time and the most life-changing moment in our lives.
Yes, exactly. And that was one of the things that inspired me so much was when I got to travel to a community called Chisasibi, which is in northern Quebec on the south shore of Hudson's Bay. It's a Cree community. And there is a midwife there, Indigenous traditional midwife. Her name's Jane Matthew. And she's over 90 years old.
90?
And yeah.
And still assisting in births.
She's assisting in birth, but she, has lived through just so much change. She hasn't been an active, midwife because of all that change. But when she was little, she helped her mother when her mother was birthing her sister. And she kept, the fire going, kept things warm for the mom, and then had traveled and learned traditional midwifery, but then that was silent. So they experienced so much disruption. Even it's the James Bay hydro project. Their whole community was flooded and they had to relocate. There was all kinds of trauma that happened. But now, because of the community members, they are so done with being evacuated. They would have to go to travel about 1,200 kilometers to Val-d'Or to have their babies.
That's a long travel.
About alone, yes, for up to 3 weeks. So they have refused to go. They say that's more of a risk for them to go to travel than for them to have their babies at home.
And I mean, for thousands of years, we did have our babies at home. This is not new technology. This is ancient, viable technology that's having a resurgence. And the idea that somehow we're being irresponsible or creating more risk, I think doesn't take into account the physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional capacities and needs of who we are, whole and complete. It's not just about having some fancy machinery or, a doctor who's perhaps well-trained or newly trained in the process of birth. Women are experts in this area because they are the life givers. So I love that you've been able to travel and meet some of the older wisdom keepers. Yeah. 90 years old is incredible. I want to switch lanes a little bit, Rebeka, and kind of redirect some of your thoughts back to our stories. And you have an online magazine called Muskrat Magazine.
Yes.
And I don't hear you talk too much about that in our interactions. But tell the listeners a little bit about this magazine, how it came about, what inspired you to do that, how you capture our stories, and why you chose the name Muskrat.
Yeah, so Muskrat Magazine, it's an online Indigenous arts and culture magazine. And we've been around now for over 10 years.
Wow.
And yes, and for me, it was inspired, before I got into, the birth work and such, again, though, for the same reason as wanting to learn and have access to our traditional knowledge, and just finding so much beauty in that knowledge. And so as a young person, I grew up in many different towns and cities across the country. And when I was younger, I had the great fortune of doing some traveling. And I went to Central America and traveled for a couple of years working with an Indigenous human rights organization there. And they had told me about the terrible experience of the scorched earth policies Indigenous people had faced. And there was a war there where they were basically under attack from their government and the paramilitaries. And I hadn't even heard about this.
We don't often hear about what happens to other Indigenous communities in the Americas anyways. The news does not travel or make mainstream through to us so that we could even become aware. It's usually through travel or through individual media outreach attempts. And those are usually smaller magazines or smaller social media outlets. And they don't get a lot of wide exposure. But the crimes against creation and humanity are seemingly around the world, targeted specifically at Indigenous people. And it always ties back to resource extraction, where there's no win-win. It's a bigger monopoly, wants to take everything at the harm and risk of those whose home it is, whose livelihood depends on the health and wellness of the environments they're in.
Yes, exactly. And so that's how I felt. This was in the 90s, and, we didn't have the internet
right.
when I was learning, about these things, because exactly, they were not shared in the media.
Yeah.
And even about the residential school at that time was not even acknowledged,
right.
And shared. And there was nothing said about colonization. Like, that word wasn't even used.
Yeah. Well, I think it was used, but it was used more in what the colonizers assumed was a good way.
Yeah.
Colonization somehow advanced primitive societies and communities, which is an untruth, because we can see clearly that the primitive perception is a misunderstanding of relationality to creation, where we honor and balance or honor the balance and harmony of what creation brings to us, so that those that come after us can benefit just as those that came before us. Mm-hmm. So I think colonization is not a new word, but the truth and reality, the complexity of what it truly is and how it impacts just one targeted people, which is Indigenous people worldwide, is now kind of coming to light. It's so interesting. You talk about being there in the 1990s where the internet wasn't available yet. And but we had at that point the freedom to travel, because the practice in Canada of having a pass to leave your First Nations community was still in existence right up to the 60s. And while the government might deny it, we lived in those communities and we knew that they did exist, and the Indian agent was there. But what made you decide to go all the way to South America to explore this? And then how did that kind of resonate into your magazine itself? What stories did you tell?
Yeah, I feel like I just have this, urge to learn more. Somehow knowing that, the mainstream was missing a big piece of an important piece of who I am. And because the mainstream, didn't include Indigenous knowledge or a spiritual knowledge or, an understanding of the world in a whole way. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was in my heart. I've known that is there. I feel that. And so I think just being young and adventurous, and, just, maybe being half, foolish in a way, I went with a backpack by myself and
Wow.
traveled. And then though I did also do volunteer work connected to an organization. And so they linked with this organization. Their goal was to link like-minded groups. So they linked Indigenous young people to Indigenous young people. And that's where I met, I guess, my Mayan counterparts. They were Mayan young people engaged in their communities. And then we spent 3 months living and working with them with an organization called Defensoria Maya, which is a human rights organization. And then they came to Canada, to Vancouver Island. That's where I was living at the time. And were hosted by the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And they got to travel with us. And we just all got this education that we had never heard before.
Wow.
And it was like, for me, learning from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs was even more eye-opening, because I got to hear our Indigenous history for the first time. And that's where I realized the power of education is so powerful, that we have access to this knowledge. And so that's really what inspired me for Muskrat Magazine, and at that time we had this digital technology that was, we have access to.
Yes. Yeah.
Before we didn't have that, within the mainstream media. And so,
freedom,
I got inspired by our creation story itself. The little muskrat, the humble muskrat, is trying to bring Earth up for Sky Woman, to put the Earth on the turtle's back so that Sky Woman can rest. And from there, create land and Turtle Island for the people. But, all the animals try, the most powerful water animals, the loon, the beaver, and all of them aren't able to do it. And they all kind of laugh, at the muskrat because he's so small, but he goes and he's gone a really long time.
And he does it.
So worried, but he does it.
He does it.
And
I also heard, I also heard that the muskrat still continues today to make its little nest. They're called push-ups, and they look like little miniature Earths. So always a reminder of their humility and their bravery in ensuring that life carries on. I love the reason for the name of the magazine. Do you remember your very first article and what it was about?
Well, we did actually invite Deborah McGregor, Dr. Deborah McGregor, who's an Anishinaabe historian and professor, and she actually wrote about the muskrat. Oh. And that was our first article. And, the interpretation of the muskrat creation story, and just how inspiring that story is for her kids. She shared that with her children who were small at the time. And so that was our first story, and it's still, you can read it today. It's still, available on the magazine. And so that's what we found was, through the arts, it's such a powerful way to explore and express who we are as Indigenous people.
For sure. Our stories are still not really being told unless it's negative. When you look at kind of what makes the mainstream, it's always some sort of negative reflection on choices that we've made just to be heard, just to stand up for our rights as sovereign nations in this country, just to remind, colonization, one, that we're still here. We're not a dying, disappearing race. But two, we have agreements. We have agreements housed in treaties, wampum belts, our petroglyphs, our petroforms. I mean, we have a whole trackable history of our continued existence, and the fact that we didn't come from any place else. We've always been here. And I do believe that there's lots and lots of room for our stories and lots of ways to tell our stories. And you've captured two through the magazine and, of course, your television shows that you have brought to life. What's in the mix next? Where are you going to dabble next?
Well, I feel like I'm just on this journey of having learned so much, right? As you start to spend time with knowledge keepers and thinking about that, there's just so much to learn. And what I have been inspired through Spirit of Birth is I've realized I've heard and learned so many beautiful teachings about Grandmother Moon. And what I see now, just in the past month, is there has been a launch that has orbited the moon, Grandmother Moon. And I've been following that launch. And
you're talking a rocket ship?
Yeah. So
okay.
It was a NASA space launch. And the ship is called Orion. And there was a Canadian astronaut that was part of the 4-person crew. And it was it included 3 Americans and 1 Canadian. And that Canadian, he has a relationship with some of our traditional lodges here on Turtle Island.
Yes.
And in fact, there's an Anishinaabe artist from the Turtle Lodge in Manitoba who designed for him a space patch. And on that patch includes the 7 sacred laws and Grandmother Moon at the center.
So for listeners who may not know about the 7 sacred laws or the 7 sacred teachings, or sometimes the 7 grandfather teachings, do you want to share those teachings, what the words are?
I don't really have all of them.
Yeah. I've got love, humility, bravery,
love. Yeah.
Humility, truth, and we're missing a couple. But
wisdom.
Wisdom. Yes. We can't forget wisdom. And there's one more. But you can look those up online. I mean, that's one of the bonuses of being so connected. It shrunk the world in terms of access to wisdom and knowledge of so many people. And I know that, in this time of the degreening, the rape of our mother, the earth, and that's literally what resource extraction is, because they're overtaking, they're over-harvesting, and it's not replaceable. And it took thousands and thousands of years for many of these things, and millions in some instances, to even come into existence. And, my heart is hurting so much with kind of the over-harvesting and the lack of respect in the harvest process, because it's considered a commodity, and the commodification of every living thing on earth will always be a crime in my view. I mean, we're not so far removed from slavery and, the impoverishment and genocidal tactics heaped upon us right here in Canada. So I think about how the work that you're doing is a legacy. It's instrumental. It's something that will live long after you're walking the earth, for people to research and perhaps explore and expand their minds. Who inspires you, Rebeka? Who inspires you in the work that you do?
Who inspires me?
Yeah.
There's so many people
I know.
Over the years. Yes. It's people that use their voice, and express their love. Like the storytellers, those are people that have inspired me. And so here in Wissahickon, myself and Anita Chichok, we co-founded the Gitchie-Daywan Indigenous Storytellers Festival. And that is a festival where we invite master storytellers, storytellers who have that traditional knowledge and continue to pass that and share that. And so when we were coming up with the name Gitchie-Daywan, it means big heart. And those are the storytellers, those people that have those, they're big-hearted people, because they share their knowledge and they share that love.
Which is the norm for us in Indigenous communities, right?
Yeah, it is. But I'm one of these people that I can be a little shy. So maybe that's why I kind of hide behind a camera, you know, or express in a different way, you know. There are people that are just very gifted, and I consider you to be one of those people.
Thank you.
That is a gifted orator, you know, that has a big heart, and your willingness to share it could be through song, through ceremony, through storytelling, and with the ability to inspire people, the ability to help people see, expand their lens, you know, even that two-eyed seeing, or, you know, like being able to expand their mind, their consciousness, because you're right. That is what is needed, is an expanded consciousness, and not to only look at the natural world and through commodification and resource extraction, because this is, you know, where we're at is going back to colonization, these belief systems that the land, you know, has no more value than economics, you know, like that has is leading to the destruction of humanity and of our planet.
What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. And the idea that our stories can be told by somebody who is not us when we're still here is insanity. You know, we hear this phrase, nothing about us without us. And it's us. It's us as Anishinaabe, as Haudenosaunee, as Mushkegowuk, or however you identify. It's us as Indigenous people of these lands that should be telling our stories in the wide variety of media options we have available. You are doing just extraordinary work, and it does come from your heart for sure. And I'm so, so very proud of you. But we're getting close to the end of our time together, and I always like to insert a little bit of fun. So we're now at a part of the show where I like to have a bit of fun with my guests, not making fun of you, but having a bit of fun, exploring your spontaneous answers to just random questions. The idea behind this is just to let listeners remember that you're human, you know, and while we might have great passion and purpose and we're driven by the work we do, we're also humans. And it's interesting sometimes to, you know, hear your random responses to these random questions. So are you ready?
Okay, I'll try.
Okay. Remember, first thing, you're just going to say the first thing that comes to mind. We're not judging. We're not over-analyzing. We're just speaking from our hearts to the hearts of the listeners. So here's the first question. If you had to pick one color to wear every day that reflected who you truly are, what color would you choose and why?
Oh, I think it is yellow. And I don't know, because it's the sun and it's the moon. And it is, you know, it is bright and
like you.
Yeah, I just love that color. And I've always loved yellow as a favorite color.
Oh, well, that was easy. So are you a water or land creature by nature?
Oh, I would say definitely water, except for when it comes to being on boats. So I have always been surrounded by water, like from the West Coast to here, Wissahickon, we're an island community. And I'm looking at the water right now, beautiful Manadogami, Lake Huron, and, you know, swim as much as I can in the lake. And I love, my favorite place in the whole world is a hot spring, a natural hot spring.
I love hot springs too.
Oh.
Who doesn't? They're so nourishing for the body and the soul. Okay, next question.
Okay, next one. Yeah.
If you could choose someone famous to be your neighbor, who would that be?
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, this is I don't know. It would be like, who's popping into my head right now is David Suzuki.
David's okay.
Yeah. He's just like this father figure to me. I've never formally met him, but he's been there my whole life, and I love his voice. And he's one of the people I've been inspired by. And it's so funny because my dad had this resemblance to
to David.
Yeah, my dad's name was Stephen, and he had a white hair and a long beard. My dad, you might have met him before, but people used to call him Steven Suzuki on the res.
Okay, next question. We got to move on.
Yeah.
Have you had a famous crush?
A famous crush? Oh, okay. Like a celebrity celebrity crush?
Yeah.
Oh, when I was younger, of course, I loved 90210 with kind of the big show.
Yes.
And it was, oh my God, Jason Priestley. And
so cute.
Yeah, and it was just, I had a connection to him. He came to our town where I was a waitress. And
wow.
Yeah, and I was actually not a waitress. I was like a server. So I would come out with desserts, just fancy desserts.
And your phone number?
Yeah. And anyways, I got to in the height of 90210, I got to explain all these delicious desserts to him.
Well, since we're talking about restaurants, what's your favorite food, hands down?
Oh my goodness. My favorite food, it has to be candied salmon.
Oh, I love candied salmon.
Smoked wild salmon that's smoked in maple syrup.
Maple syrup.
Oh,
thebomb.com.
my goodness. Like these golden nuggets.
Oh my gosh.
Just pure.
Yeah, my mouth is watering. Yeah. We're definitely Anishinaabe Kwe for sure. Gosh, the fish and the maple syrup. That's such a beautiful combo. Oh, yeah. We're done with the rapid fire questions. I call them my RFQ. I know in the business world it's request for quote, but I call it rapid fire questions. And you did well. Were you sweating over there?
Yeah, I'm sweating a bit.
Well, you did really good. Thanks so much for playing along. So before we go, any last comments or things you want to share? Anything perhaps listeners can look forward to, keeping in mind that somebody might be listening to this, 5 years from now. So it needs to be relevant.
Mm-hmm. I just want to, invite people to look up Spirit of Birth. And there's all different information out there. There's the series, there's a short documentary, and we're launching an app, an Indigenous pregnancy app.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And of course, to come to Muskrat Magazine and, check out some of the amazing interviews and the things that artists are doing and the profiles, because, they're able to express their truth in an uncensored way and a beautiful way, again, that pulls people in. And so, I guess I'd like to say, to be inspired by Indigenous knowledge. It's something that, yes, it's our knowledge, it's sacred knowledge, but it's been denied to everybody. We're part of a humanity, and this is knowledge that is part of our human knowledge.
Yeah, let's flip the page into truth. Get out of the historic records that were told by who? Not us. And come into the present. So what's the app going to be called? Does it have a name yet?
It is also called Spirit of Birth. Spirit
of Birth app. So that's going to be available soon. So if listeners want to find you, I know that there's muskratmagazine.com, but are you on socials or where else are you?
Yeah, I am through Muskrat Magazine and also through Spirit of Birth or just my name, Rebeka Tabobondung. And they can get a hold of me through either of those entities.
Right. Are you on Facebook and Instagram?
And I am on Facebook. One of the things that's very sad in Canada right now is there's been a ban by Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, of Canadian media. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to to share what we publish on
Oh my God.
for Muskrat Magazine, and no Canadian news has been able to for 2 years now. So this is an example where, it's good to reach out directly and not become reliant on these corporate platforms, because they can easily just decide to not have you on their platform, and you can lose that.
And then the misinformation that can result from not having the full story. I'm really saddened to see such a powerful tool be shrunk down to serve just 1% of the population. We all deserve to have our stories told. So
exactly. And that's the thing, is like for audience members is to know that, to continue to be creative and to expand or utilize all different outlets for information sharing.
Okay.
And that's what you're doing, Kim, like through, the podcast, like it's a relatively,
I'm trying.
Another medium.
Okay.
And so that's something that is for us to use as much as possible.
Well, Chimigwech for joining us today. For listeners who are unfamiliar with that word, it's the equivalent of thank you in our beautiful Anishinaabe language, which all Canadians should learn. But you were awesome as always, and I really, really look forward to our paths crossing again. And it's my hope that this was an enjoyable experience for you, Rebeka. Such a privilege to have a bit of your time. It's the most precious gift that we can give another, because we can't get a second of it back. But I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart to your heart for giving us a bit of insight into not only your incredible passion and work, but what drives you and how people can then find you. So have a wonderful day. Thank you for being with us on Ancestral Voices, We Belong.
Miigwech, thank you so much for the invitation. And on a final note.
Us women.
I said I was shy, but I was just thinking the 7 in sacred teachings, the last 2 we didn't say are honesty and respect. And, that's something that I think, you exemplify, Kim, and thank you for, asking me to share. And
on such short notice, you were amazing. Wow. I appreciate you.
You too. So miigwech, chimigwech. And we'll talk soon.
Be well. Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So that was Rebeka Tabobondung from Wasauksing First Nation, who is an incredible filmmaker, writer, and poet, and just all around good human. I love her sense of humor, but I love the joyousness in which she continues to breathe life into her life walk and sprinkle that magic to everybody. Ancestral Voices is sponsored by the town of Aurora, Design to Plume, and the Wholesome Conscious. And as always, we're powered by Neighbor Media, who do such incredible work behind the scenes, ensuring that we look professional and polished in the final iteration. We can be found on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. So please give us a like, follow, and of course, share. You never know who might be inspired by a conversation like we had today. You can also comment to let us know perhaps who you would like to hear from and listen to. And a 5-star rating will always be welcomed. I am your host, Grandmother Kim Wheatley. Always an honor to have your ear. I'm going to wish each and every one of you a wonderful day. Till next time, be well.